But here's the thing. There's actually a real serious topic we have to discuss relative to exactly that team failing to get out. Because remember, guys, even though I know they won their last 2 games, so it looked really good for them, the problem is the game that decided their fate at Worlds and actually instantly put Rogue through and didn't require any tiebreakers in terms of the playoff spots was the GAM game. That obviously was the one that no one expected Top to lose. Well, it turns out, basically, we'll get into exactly the specifics in a second, but as far as I can tell, look, they might have lost no, I actually think essentially this might be the most open shut case I've ever seen of a bug deciding not that the other team loses, because technically in theory I guess you could have still not lost the game, but that they didn't win. Like, here's the difference. You know, normal bugs, guys, are like something happens in lane or like an interaction in a team, like the Orianna one. You still get hit by it, but the visual graphics what's off. Essentially what happened was the basics, and Monte can correct me if I'm wrong here, is Jackie Love on Lucian had the Maw of Malmortius, which is obviously the AP item that makes a shield when you go below a certain amount of health. And basically, when an ability was done on him, it just didn't activate, and he didn't get the shield. And as a result, this was all calculated by Vandril, I think his name is on Twitter. And basically, this guy shows with screenshots that not only did it not activate, but the moment it didn't activate, guys, was when literally Top Esports was trying to knock the Nexus down of GAM. And then the other detail that's mad is when he looked and he saw what the health should have been. Like, basically, he lost something like 600 health when he would have had like whatever, like something around 600. He would have, I think, went down to like 90 health after that. Basically, if you look who was left alive on GAM, it's only basically, I think, like the set that could have done anything to him. And even like the E, I think it was, or the R or whatever, the set would only have done 500. So essentially, unless Jackie Love took his hands off the keyboard and didn't auto-attack the Nexus, they would have won the game if the Maw had activated. So the reason this is wild, like I said, is because lots of other cases, it's just like, it's so debatable. Like, should that be a restart? Should not? This basically, like I said, it didn't make them lose the game. They started to do something else there, but it did stop them winning the game. And if they had won that game, we don't know what would happen yet in the next 2 games. I'll always say that because you might play differently, like I'm sure we all suspect they did once they were out. But it's one of the craziest ones I've ever seen in League do. This might be the most like open and shut one where I don't even know if you have to do the regame. I just know it did stop Top winning the game.
Yeah. So what happened was there was a Karthus ult from Levi on GAM, and apparently the lifeline passive on Maw of Malmortius, which gives you the shield when you get to 30%, didn't actually it didn't trigger, but it went on cooldown, which is the other part of this. Is like, not only did it never appear because the calculated damage from the Karthus ult, basically if it had triggered, like you say, Thorin would have left him with 500 or 600 HP at the end. And as a result of that, they basically didn't get the last like couple auto attacks.
There's only a couple he needed, and he was on Lucian for fuck's sake. He could have dashed.
He was going to dash champ
exactly.
Hard. Like, yeah. Basically, it seems that it was highly likely, given the game state, that he would have finished the game. Yeah, and there's also no way for a player to know in the moment that this is happening. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous. Like, why would Jackie Love know that with, I mean, it's probably not very frequently he's building Maw of Malmortius on a lot of AD carries.
Situational item,
super situational item that was dealing with a fed Karthus. He probably doesn't know exactly how much damage he should be taking from a Karthus with that many items versus an AD carry with Maw of Malmortius, because
and you're panicking, you're trying to end the game, you're not thinking about that shit. Yeah,
it's such a fringe situation, and like, you're not going to whip out your fucking calculator and like do the math on that right now. If I have 94 MR and blah 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 blah, right? So I think the problem is that, I mean, I don't know how you get around this, frankly. Yes. Like the analogy that Doa made on stream, which I think is accurate, is sometimes refs make bad calls. In this case, it's like the bug is the rules of the game that are being interpreted incorrectly, right? It's just being the rules are being interpreted incorrectly by a computer. Like by the
this
game
is
itself.
Basically like, if you remember, this is a good reference. Do you remember a few years ago when the Rams were playing against the Saints, and there was that like ridiculous like defensive play that should definitely have been like a holding call,
remember that.
Stop the guy catching the ball, and that absolutely decided who won that game. And it was an infamous like bad missed call, and then obviously it made people even. This is why also, by the way, Riot, I know it's not intentional in this case, but the other reason you also have to be careful what game deciding calls like that is, it makes people think that you're biased in favor or against one set of teams and competitors.
Yeah. And so, like, I don't think anybody noticed in the moment. And also it took, the willpower of Chinese fans trying to figure out, thousands of Chinese fans looking at this and combing over the VOD. I think there are some fundamental issues here that I'm not sure it's really possible to overcome. The game is built on garbage code.
Yep.
And if you set a precedent where the fans can come over every second, even though obviously this one was particularly egregious, if you set a precedent where the fans can come over every second of footage, well, then we're going to have a lot of fucking remakes and scandals, because there's probably bugs that happen in every game. There was a Darius ult reset bug that happened earlier this Worlds as well. There was the Orianna bug. They got Orianna temporarily disabled, and then they fixed it, so Orianna got re-enabled. So there have been a lot of problems, and they're going to continue to be problems, because this game is basically built on a house. It's a house of cards, and the more they add complex systems such as like Viego and Silas ults, that, you know, they add all of these really, really, you know, huge systems that kind of touch every part of the gameplay. We're just going to see more and more of these bugs. The more champions they add into the game, they're like at 160 right now, the more interactions there are. And I don't think there's a good solution to this problem except for remaking the entire game on a new engine, which obviously is not going to be a thing that happens, because there's no return on the money. It would cost probably hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And they're not going to get the return off of the money on doing that. And I think they've said that they're not going to do that, I believe. So,
oh no! If you don't remember when they did the graphical redesign of Summoner's Rift, I think that was the time, because I think that was in like 2016 or something. Monte, it's like quite a while ago now. If you remember, they even sort of said at the time, like essentially, like, this is it. Like, we're not making like the new engine. We'll just make it look a bit better. And the joke was, even then it looked worse than Dota 2, which came out like 5 years earlier or something, because Dota 2 was on a more advanced engine. Now I have a few angles I thought we could get into on this that are more abstract, right? So as you're saying, part of the problem is you have to establish what the precedent is. So I'll give you a quick example from my native game of CSGO. In CSGO, you obviously will have scenarios where during a round, someone's computer will like crash, or they'll lag out of the server, especially if it's an online game. And we have a rule there, which even then, by the way, causes lots of drama, but they've set a precedent. The rule there is, if no one's done any damage to anyone yet, you definitely just restart the round no matter what. If there has been damage done, then it becomes like, sometimes there's scenarios where it can happen. Most of the times, no, you have to just play on. And the idea is, in that game, it's a different game because of the round-based feature, you just sort of know as a competitor, right? Look, we're just going to lose this one. But again, like, it's almost like an active God type clause. Like, if it happens, it could happen to them, could happen to us. It just happened. You go on with it, right? So the problem is, the reason you need to set a hard and fast rule is because, as you say, if you just make it that any bug causes a remake, well, then you're going to have ridiculous scenarios, like, you know, like someone like, I'll give you an example. Technically, there could be a type of minion block that isn't supposed to be intentional, and then suddenly that messes up the lane, and I was supposed to have push. Are we really going to start a whole game again because that happens? Probably not, right? So to me, it's probably something like, there's got to be a level of severity that you sort of say, this is my cutoff point. So basically, unless it's some like game deciding type thing, like this ability potentially could be. So a couple of things I wanted to say was this. One, obviously now, especially because it wasn't even, I think, on the day that this bug was discovered, like that it actually happened, I don't think you have any chance in any universe, even for Worlds, of getting them to redo the game, bring people back into a studio, maybe even have to rebook flights then, who knows, mate. There's a million angles that could get
They could have already been gone the next day.
Exactly. So I don't think you're ever going to get that happening.
Yeah, usually, but by the way, guys, I mean, there are a lot of reasons why there wasn't going to be any remakes on this one, for those wondering. Because
it also caused all the other games to remake too, potentially.
Yeah, you'd have to remake all the other games after it, because basically by top getting eliminated, we don't know, is Rogue taking more risks, such as by picking the support Nasus because they feel they're safe in playoffs? Are teams hiding strategies that they might deploy if they were more desperate, that they are planning to use for playoffs instead? There's just too many questions, and it affects the decision making of all of the other games of the day. So you'd have to replay all the games of the day. Okay, when are you going to do that? Oh, well, we don't have any time because we booked this venue and the crew and everything for this amount of time. Can we get everybody back on Monday in order to redo this again? Is the venue even open? Is the venue even available? I think they're staying in the same venue, so I would imagine the venue is available. But obviously, it's enormously expensive to bring in all of their
rules about how many days you're actually broadcasting, or who knows, right?
Could be union rules about like how many days in a row you can broadcast without doing overtime. Could be a bunch of shit, guys, that we just don't know about. And so, and also, usually Riot, obviously to save money, kicks people out pretty fast after you lose. You're usually like on a plane the next fucking day. So it's possible that some of these people, by the time this bug was discovered and publicized, were already gone. Like, they could have already been on flights back to China and Vietnam. Like, that's not outrageous to say. And like, I just don't know how you can't put the genie back into the bottle on this one, right? It had to be caught in the time. Yeah, I don't know what you do. I think
what you say there is key, by the way. I think it has to be obvious and apparent to maybe almost everyone in the scenario and at the moment. Because I'll give you an example. The problem with this bug, as you say, is no one was trying to do some like complex mathematical equations, like as all the fucking things go by. Right? In reality, we all play off feel and looking at the health bars and just excitement and so. So like, I'll give you an example.
That it went on cooldown, so you think, it just absorbed. Yeah. It just got blown up. Like, how the fuck did you know?
Like, here's my example I'd give you. If instead that was someone in a similar scenario who was like about to end the game or save the game, and they did a Zhonya's Monte, but the Zhonya's just lasted twice as long, we'd all instantly notice it. We'd go, wait a minute. And because it'd be so obvious that you'd be shielding all the damage, it definitely would get paused. They would pause the game, and that maybe even would be a remake. You know what I mean? It's just too obvious there. Because that's the problem with this particular bug is I don't mind as much the occasional bug or just like, it's one spell just didn't interact properly. The problem with this was it was potentially game deciding. Like, I'll give you an example. Another one that's like a classic one. When everyone in the modern day, right, in European soccer complains about they've got now basically like an actual computer system where it's video assisted replay, and they go off that and it helps determine whether or not like a foul happened or someone's offside or whatever. And they use it all the time now in the Premier League, right? And you can imagine, because how fans work, every time they think it's wrong from the video replay, they just complain like it's shit, like get rid of it, it's fucking garbage. But what they don't seem to realize is it's not like the human guys always did a better job for the refs, especially back in the day. Like, obviously back in the day, maybe the guys were even more ridiculous, who knows? But basically, like, if you know that at least there is a video thing that can look at all angles, because remember, the problem in like a physical sport is the ref can be at wrong angle. He could be like behind two people, or he's running and he doesn't look properly, or he could even trip in theory and something could happen. So like a classic example I would give people as to why like you do want some kind of system to at least potentially review, it'd be hard in this case, is like one of the most famous incidents ever in in world soccer history basically, is in the World Cup in 1986. Maradona literally just punched the ball into the goal, but from his angle like this, like the ref just sort of looked like he headed it in, but he actually hit it with his fist and just scored a handball. And obviously, if you had the video thing, that would instantly get disallowed. Like, it would see all angles, it would see that he punched it in, and it would have been a different game. It was against England, which is why I'm bringing it up. So it's a classic example that everyone English knows, right? So I do think in the modern day, look, as you say, there are scenarios like in real sport. There are going to be cases where just unfair things happen. There's even going to be things that almost are just like an act of God. It's like, that's just the way it went. I mean, the sports example would be the sun could really just shine in your eyes when you're trying to throw it at some angle. That could happen. Or you could be in the NFL's probably the best one, and you're on some snowy, rained out pitch and you trip over or the turf comes up. If that happens, I'm sorry, they're just going to say that's the game. They're not going to stop the game and give you a point back. So you're on some level, you have to accept we can't get all these bugs. But my problem for this one is like, it isn't the only solution because no one noticed that the game engine has to get better. It really is the only one, right? You have to sort of just not have the bug exist. I can't actually see what other way around it is on this one.
I think what the problem is, Thorin, is that this game, especially compared to a lot of modern games, has way more bugs, like way more, because of its shitty engine. I know at least with Overwatch, we basically never had bugs or never had these issues because the game engine was developed from scratch at Blizzard and is extremely robust. I mean, I don't see very many bugs that are happening in CSGO, despite that.
It's only like lagging out, like I said. It's almost never actually like in the game a bug. No.
Yeah. There's very few bugs. I mean, obviously the coaching, the coaching cheating scandal bug, but that was an observation bug, and it wasn't like a gameplay bug. And that, CSGO came out in 2012. It came out 10 years ago. So they haven't even upgraded to the Source 2 engine. I'm not super familiar with Dota, so I won't comment on how many bugs Dota has. It might, in MOBA, for all I know, MOBAs might be more inclined to having these bugs.
I think possibly because, like you say, if you think about in League, like think about the procs on the mid laner's item, and then the defensive spell, and then like the passives, and like as you said, things like Viego being added. Well, Viego now means you can bog on anyone else's fucking passive or ult or whatever. Like, now we've made a million more interactions, haven't we? With exactly. Viegoception.
I mean, there's this shit that always happens in League that I don't even, I don't know. As far as I can tell, nobody else knows either. Like, for example, when Viego was Anivia and triggered the Anivia egg passive, I didn't know that interaction existed because Anivia is not played at the professional scene. And then also the sequence of events you have to get there are, is Anivia dead? Does Viego possess Anivia? Does Viego as Anivia die? And that's the only way you see that the egg passive. So, you learn things, everybody learns things. It's impossible to know everything about League of Legends, basically, because it's just an infinite amount of interactions. So I suspect the same thing is probably true of Dota. But I think that obviously the game engine is a tremendous issue with League of Legends, and I can only assume will be getting worse over time because it's just a pile of shit that they keep shoveling more shit on top of. And I don't know how you fix that underlying problem without going back and trying to, restart the game. And I probably, if I had to guess from Riot's calculations, they may not think that there is value in spending all that money on a title that is already the biggest game in the world. Like, the question is, does rebuilding the game get them more players? I don't know if it's possible for them to get more players, frankly.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
They're not really incentivized to do it, unfortunately. Like you said,
right. They're not incentivized to do it. And even if you think, okay, well, we're going to get more players, well, how long until a new genre of game? Like, nobody saw battle royale games coming. As technology improves, we're going to have new multiplayer genres that just emerge. So is it worth it to spend all that money on that? Or is it worth it to spend the money on R&D for games that may be able to last, another 20 years, that are really cutting edge in terms of their esports or competitive experiences or their MMO, right? Like, I just think that it's very unlikely to happen, but fans, you just better get used to it. Is all I'm saying. You better get used to it. It doesn't actually bother me that much because it's very rare that I feel like we have a game deciding bug. And I think there are arguments that you can make in this game that, Top had plenty of opportunities to win this game. It rarely comes down to one moment. The fans tunnel on that because they're mad. But if we're being honest, Top underperformed. It was a trap game for them. They were probably preparing for their other opponents. They weren't expecting some of the crazy Karthus shit that GAM tried to pull out, and for them to play a pretty decent early game and get into a late game state where Karthus was extremely powerful. Yeah, I mean, I think it's unlikely to change, and it's unfortunate, but we better just be accustomed to this because this year in particular has had way more bugs than any other year of League of Legends that I've seen. It has been absolutely crazy to see the number of game delays, everything that's going on, games paused, especially in LCK for like an hour at a time. I found it very difficult this summer to watch any games live because I literally just it was such a waste of time. I mean, it's usually a waste of time because there are large breaks if you're consuming a large amount of gameplay in any esport to watch it live because it's just very inefficient. So I tend to watch VODs anyway. But there are some really crazy instances where I go back at the LCK VODs and I'm like, why is this VOD 7 hours long? And the reason is because there's an hour and a half pause stuck in there somewhere that I can fortunately just skip over afterwards, but is actually, is just torturous for the players. We've seen so many things like disabled Hexflash, re-enabled.
Remember that detail as well. One of the worst things about bugs in League when it's a technical pause is you cannot speak. You can't even talk to your teammates. So if it's a 1 hour pause, enjoy. You're just sat there like some sort of mad isolation technique just in your own head. And you have to be ready at a moment's notice to go live again. It's actually wild, isn't it?
I mean, I've told this story many times, but like an example of this was in like the EG-TSM playoff series that happened this year. I forget what the exact cause was. It could have been, there've been a lot of problems with like players playing remote because of COVID as well, and them having issues with that. But it's just now in my mind, it's just this has been the summer of pauses, which is crazy. But I literally started that series at like noon, right? A game delay started. I was watching it live and I was like, well, I have no idea how long this is going to last. So I went out to the market to my butcher, bought a bunch of ribs, brought them home, prepared them, put them in my smoker for 4 hours, took them out, ate the ribs, and the game was still going on 8 hours later. And I had finished smoking like 4 racks of ribs, which is a very slow cooking process. And it's so absurd that that's a reality that we can live in, where a best of 5 takes 8 hours or a best of 3 takes 4 hours. It's becoming increased. It was already hard to consume all of the League of Legends content that was going on, but it's even been more impossible than usual this summer.
By the way, I can tell you as someone who worked in CSGO on E-League, that also is something which will absolutely preclude esports games like League of Legends ever being on television. You can't schedule like that. Like, no matter what happens in the NFL, it can't be 8 hours. Like, it's going to be like half an hour extra max. And now that's the biggest sport like in the country. So you can get away with having half an hour extra. If as a game, you had to tell them, look, every now and then it's just going to have 2 hours extra. They couldn't run that. Like, financially, if you don't know, to show you the rest of the game, which they would do, would just cost them all their other programming. They'd have to take those shows off. They'd lose loads of ad spots that they sold to ad spot for a specific running on a show. And like basically I was told on E-League, if it ever ran over by even a few minutes into the next slot, every minute cost some like outrageous amount of money, like $100,000 or something mental. And so the producers basically just like thinking like, kill me, I'm gonna lose my job. Like, so that would mean like esports ever becoming that type of mainstream, probably not gonna happen.
And for those of you guys who are saying, well, yeah, there are like rain delays or overtime in certain sports, right? That could be theoretically infinite. Those are much bigger broadcasts than we're talking about. Like, you really have to be the top dog, or it be like a championship level sports broadcast with a massive audience in order for that to actually make sense for a network, right?
Yes.
But yeah, I just don't know, unfortunately, if there's a good answer to this question for you guys. I think that the Chinese fans are obviously very mad, but unfortunately, all of the solutions include replaying all of the games for that day, which is just ridiculous on its face. So I think, unfortunately, you just have to let this slide, let it stand, and continue the tournament. There is truth that Top had many opportunities to win that game, and they had other opportunities to win other games within their group. They played badly in the first. They just played badly in the first week of competition. And whether it was nerves, because they certainly turned on after that game, I think that maybe it was the pressure. They were in their own heads, because as soon as it didn't matter to them, they looked a hell of a lot better. Want
to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.